We'll get it.
Okay, here we go. Try again. Back to the yard. Whatever episode this is. This is Alex. This is Daniel Makabe. Hello, Daniel.
Hello, how's it going?
Good. Good. Yeah, this is really smooth. Excellent. Um, so,
The power of editing, unless you don't have that power, and then sorry, listeners.
yeah, yeah. I'm sure it'll be good. um, so last time we met was April of last year. I'm pretty confident of this when you were last here.
Yeah, I was thinking it was later, but you didn't come here last year, but I did come there last year in yeah, I guess it was mid to late April. I had like a little 2 week excursion to Europe.
Yeah,
The first
did
half
some
of which
traveling.
was
Yeah,
spent with yeah, it was the first half of which was spent with you, um, under the promise of wrestling in the south, and then being a tourist in the north, including a couple days in Scotland, which was very nice, I thought. So,
yeah.
yeah, it has been about a year. So
You had some haggis. It was all good.
I did have some haggis. I haven't had any haggis since then. I don't know if there's really a good source for it locally, but I thought it was way better than I anticipated it would be. So, have you had haggis since I was
I
last there?
have not. No, no.
You need to make it up to Scotland. That was pretty good. I don't know. I think you'd like it. You like meat. It's just meat, right?
Yeah,
So
it's true. I should
yeah,
probably.
you mix it with the potatoes and the turnips and the tatty scones and
Yeah,
the tatty biscuit. I think it was. I can't remember. The
yeah. I
tatty
love.
scones was a breakfast thing.
Yeah, yeah. Anything tatty is good. I think.
You didn't think the tatty scones were that good?
No, anything tatty is good. Anyway, this is off to an interesting start talking about potatoes
Yeah,
and
yeah,
turnips.
yeah, yes, it is. Anyways, I'll let you
Right.
lead things away from this.
Yeah, I was going to talk a bit about. I was going to bring this up later. The fact that there's the promise of wrestling, and it didn't quite turn out how we anticipated. But I
Yeah.
might as well just go there to start with anyway. I mean, there was a whole. It was going to be like I don't even know the name of the Fed. It was like I don't know. It was James Davies' fucking land and stuff. Uh,
James Davies' backyard. I'm not sure what the Fed's called.
yeah, I have no idea. But anyway, that show didn't happen.
No, it did not happen. It was
Yeah,
it was nice to visit with some people I hadn't seen in a while, like Dave and Ross and Billy
and
and
the
some of those
nail,
people I'm forgetting. The Nail, yeah, the
of
Nail was
course.
there, and everyone was nice, and it was a nice evening. But I definitely, no offense to those people and their company, but the entire reason I planned on coming to the south of England was to wrestle, specifically to wrestle ads, actually.
Yeah,
But that never happened. But we made the most of a situation.
yeah, we did. We had the tag, me and Chris versus you and Dan Vertigo at RCWA, the always hospitable RCWA. So that's good.
Yeah, no, that worked out pretty well. And I wrestled in what Scott told me was the most off-putting gear ever, which was kind of by design. Partially because I was traveling very light, and I didn't really feel like carrying all my wrestling gear around for 2 weeks in England. Not just England, but Europe. I
Yeah.
was in 6 countries. Um, but but also I was just like, let's just give this a whirl. And yeah, it's not the most flattering gear I've ever worn, but it
Was it
it,
like
it
pink
did
shorts,
it did the trick.
pink trunks, and what was the shirt say on it? It was no, it was
Oh,
like
it
a
was
vest.
my tie dye tank top. It's a local Northwest hardcore band called Power, and it has a big cartoonish, oversized hand flipping the bird, with the big X on it, of course, because they are a straight edge band. And I believe the caption is "I'm screaming fuck you." So that went over well with the youthful populace of RCWA.
I'm sure that Steve didn't mind it too much.
Yeah, that didn't dawn on me that, like, I don't know if it would have gone out on their quote unquote their television program, their weekly program, but nothing was said to me, so whatever. It worked out just fine. And the
Yeah,
match is good. I thought the match was good. So
yeah, I liked the match too. Yeah, it was good.
yeah.
Excellent. So, but what have you doing recently? You've been doing some wrestling around sort of Washington kind of stuff recently.
Yeah, so our friends at 321 Battle um, in Seattle, who you've met on a few occasions, I guess,
Yeah,
Draven Lawless and Cole Crazy, and the BXC, all the BXCW guys, Igor,
I go.
and then a bunch. I don't think you have met because those are the main three that have come up the last couple times. That uh, actually, and I guess a couple more of them came up this most last time, but you weren't here. They're kind of their new kind of top guy's name is El Chongo Blanco, and he's he's a super nice dude, and he's a super athlete. Like he's actually a legit black belt in jiu-jitsu, and he's a trainer at one of the best MMA schools in North America. But um, but yeah, so those guys are running their shows. So far, it's been regularly since December. They've been running monthly. So we've done 3 shows with them. The fourth one's coming up next week, or by the time this airs, it will have happened already. Um, but sorry to break the kayfabe on that.
Yeah,
Um,
I had like so many weeks of podcast recorded right now. It's ridiculous. I have no idea when this will come out. I I blame Luke.
if I were to guess, I would say we got 2 or 3 weeks. But
Yeah.
if you're alternating with Luke, but but yeah, so they run these regular shows. They're they're interesting shows. It's a real like hybrid of talent, and there's some guys who are really entertaining and have some really kind of well developed characters that are over with their audience, and they've got a real long standing audience, like people who have been coming to see them wrestle for years and years and years. They originally started doing shows in bars in Seattle, just on like that thin kind of foam, those puzzle mats, you
Oh,
see quite often in
yeah,
martial arts schools or in like preschools,
yeah.
and
Oh,
just that on
they had that Ronald McFundle guy, right?
they did have Ronald McFondle. You went to the Billy the Fridge record release show back in 2009, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So back then they were called Seattle Semi Pro (SSP),
Oh yeah.
and that's who Ronald McFondle was a part of, and they had a couple other guys. The 321 Battle kind of came from the ashes of Seattle Semi Pro, and so there's a few of those guys who are still around. It's made up kind of those guys, some of the BXCW guys, who we've known for years and years, dating back to when they were in a promotion called LWO back in the early to mid 2000s that we used to wrestle with. And then now the I Suck Sticks, although they refer to us as the VCW guys, they don't call us the I Suck Sticks guys, which whatever. um, but
Do you think of yourselves
so
as I Suck Sticks guys or VCW guys?
that's an interesting question, actually. Drew just recently did up a design for a T-shirt for him and I to do for our newly kind of our tag team, which we've been doing for the last year or so, but we've had maybe 4 matches. Um, the Rain City Coalition, and he did up a T-shirt design that's kind of a parody on the Vancouver Whitecaps logo, which is the local football club that we are both season ticket holders for, and in it said VCW. It says VCW. It doesn't say I Suck Sticks. So I think he's just trying to appeal to a more broader mass. I think we'll always be VCW. That's how people first, not any. I don't think there's anyone who first came to know us as, oh, I Suck Sticks. It was like, oh, that's what the VCW guys are doing now. And it had its purpose for sure, but I think we're VCW, forever and always. Or what's the catchphrase on the beginning of WWE shows? Now, forever, always. Is that it?
I think it's then, now, forever.
That makes more sense because
That's
it's
what
like past,
it
present, future. Mine was present, future, future, right? So,
yeah.
but
I was
yeah.
just thinking back
So
to the you know those jackets you had for a while, the really nice
yes,
VCW jackets. I think you should make some I Suck Sticks versions of those. I think those would go down well.
we we talked about making shirts, but then we all kind of decided that we wanted something we could wear in public. Although We do have the shirts that we got made when we did the invasion of NYE a few years ago, where we were kind of the offshoot of I Suck Sticks. It was the kind of the premier representation of I Suck Sticks, which we refer to as Dix One International, which was a play on a Dragon Gate faction called World One International, which had a load of Japanese guys, but it also had Ricochet and had Pac, and so we basically stole their color scheme, and we stole their entire logo, and we changed the World One to Dix One. And at one point, we contemplated changing the I in Dix to be rather phallic looking, but decided that may not be the best idea. So we decided against that. But yeah, no, there's no I Suck Sticks T-shirts or jackets to be made. But we also have the VCW jackets, and like Drew and Kelly still wear theirs pretty regularly, actually.
So there's no like replica I Suck Sticks champion of men fighting and grappling replica belts in the works.
For sale? No,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, actually, the belt itself has to be redone. We kind of had a jumbling around of the belts since we've had our last show here, which was in September, and yeah, so we actually need to remake that belt because it got the graphics, for lack of a better word, got kind of dismantled from it, which is a shame because I don't know if I'll ever be able to make as good of a belt as that one.
Oh, you made that
That
one,
might
did
be
you?
the finest. I made that one, yeah. Kelly and I made it, but yeah, we were the two who went to the adult store to buy the source material. Um, but I definitely was the one who spearheaded the creation of that belt, and I like to say that it's one of my finer accomplishments in life, certainly from an artistic standpoint. But
Was it
but yeah,
inspired by the
uh,
hat that was made for Zeus McFly, or is that just not?
I never made that. No, that was not. I had nothing to do with that.
That was
That
Coops,
was
was it?
actually that was a spin-off of. There was one that was made. Yeah, it was either made by Coots or another Rhode Islander named Ryan Odino, and I can't remember who wore it. Maybe Coots wore it out there, and then I think they originally, I don't remember the story. It was either given to Luke, or it might have been destroyed. Anyways, the one that Luke wears now is one that he made himself, as kind of a homage to that original one.
I think that the original one might have gone back to England with Ross. I have a feeling.
That's exactly what happened. No, maybe was it Ross or Billy?
I think it was Ross because
Okay.
it was because Ross wrestled Luke. No, maybe Billy took it back and gave it to Ross or something like
No,
that.
I think Billy took it back at Versus the World 4. I'm pretty sure, and after like Luke gave it to him as a peace offering or as a sign of their newfound kinship. After the Pikey death match, which still has like two of the grossest bumps I've ever seen in my life: the power bomb onto the stanchion,
Yeah.
and the Storm Cradle Driver from one dumpster onto another dumpster.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I haven't watched that match in forever, but that match holds up well as
I
one. If
watched
you
it
just ever
quite
want to,
recently, actually. I watched it quite recently, and it's definitely there's some fun stuff in that match. It's
yeah,
quite something.
they did some really fun stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, I'll take it back to the start then. I wanted to talk about how you sort of got into wrestling to begin with, actually. Not just
Sure.
actually doing wrestling, but watching it because you've had a fandom not just of I don't know what you first started watching, but you're very up on all the Japanese stuff and old stuff. I'd say you're pretty heavily into like history of wrestling and stuff like that as well, or at least you're up on it. So where did it all
Yeah,
come from?
I think that's fair to say. I my first real I remember watching wrestling as a kid. Um, I watched it here or there when I was, like 5 or 6 years old. Realistic. This is going to date me, by the way. The first real show I remember watching was I watched WrestleMania 7 live on closed circuit when they still did that, which that's how like the original WrestleMania was broadcast, and they still did it in certain markets up until like I think 7 and 8. And what it was instead of you watching the pay per view at home, you would go to your local arena. Like I went to the Pacific Coliseum where the Vancouver Canucks, our local hockey team, play, and they had a massive screen set up in the middle of the floor, like the skating rink, but it was just concrete, obviously. And you would sit in the stands like you were at a sporting event, and you watched the show on the big screen, and they pumped the audio over the PA system.
Wow.
And so my father took me to see WrestleMania 7, and because I think I was starting to show a bit of interest, and it just took off from there. I remember the becoming like a diehard. I would buy all the magazines, the WWF magazine. I think I had every issue from, I'm going to say, July 91, which had Jake the Snake Roberts on it. I distinctly remember that being the first issue I ever bought. Up until, I'm going to say, early 95 is when I stopped buying that magazine. WCW's magazine came out shortly thereafter in the late 91, and I was a regular. I never subscribed to any of these magazines. No, that's not true. I did subscribe to the WWF magazine for a period of a year or two. And then after that, I got into Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and that's sort of how I branched off and started hearing about ECW and the Japanese stuff. But that wasn't until a little later on. Maybe I'm 13, 14. But all throughout the 90s, I was a big fan of WWF and WCW. WCW was a little harder to come by up here in Canada. It didn't really air under regular means. WWF aired on a variety of channels, but like Raw aired on TSN, which is our main sports channel, and so yeah, I started going to house shows. My first house show was later on in '91. I remember going to see. Actually, it was fallout from the Hogan Slaughter match from WrestleMania 7. They did a boot camp match. I want to say it was later that summer in '91. But yeah, I started going to house shows and fairly regularly. My love of wrestling never really waned much, but I don't remember going to a ton of house shows in the '90s. I can remember a couple in '91. I know I went to one in '95 with Diesel as the champion. But yeah, so just always a fan of wrestling. Collecting the action figures, putting on my own little cards with the action figures, and to this day I have a pretty decent collection of not the big hard LJN ones that were popular in the '80s, but kind of the second era of WWF action figures that were the plastic ones that had they would have like kind of a spring action kind of thing, or they had some form of articulation. Some of them, like like the Hulk Hogan one, his arms would go up and he could press slam a guy or whatever, right? So I had a big collection of those, collection of the WCW figures. That was kind of a thing growing up as an only child with a single parent. Quite often, like on a fixed budget, but like weekends, Friday nights, my mom would pick me up from school, and we'd go to the local video store, and I'd get to rent whatever movie I would want to rent, and I could stay at home on a Friday night and watch a movie, with a friend who'd come over or not, quite often not. And I never rented movies. I always would rent wrestling pay-per-views. And that was back in the day when the local video shops had tons of them, dating back to all throughout the 80s. And it'd be kind of a neat thing where I think we had memberships to 3 or 4 different video rental shops because they had different selection of what pay-per-views they personally had, right? So had I thought about it at the time, it would have made sense for me to dub them all to my own cassettes, but I didn't, and I ended up renting the same ones multiple times years later, because I'd have to see what happened again. I may have forgotten, or I'd want to myself, right? So
Yeah.
so yeah, I was just always kind of a big fan from a pretty 6-7 years old. Yeah,
I remember
that's
you
the one
telling
good
me
thing.
once, about that you'd done was it like a school project or something like that, where you'd got in touch with It's like Leatherface or something like that. Like the guy who did Leatherface in Japan. Is that right?
So that, I mean, we're fast forwarding about 10 years now,
Oh,
but
okay.
that's true. No, it's fine. In my senior year of high school, I took a social studies course called Comparative Civilizations, um, which to get into university here, you have to take a certain amount of courses that have what they call provincial exams. It's your basic kind of like your um, Englishes and sciences and math and languages. Basically, any of the non-electives, any kind of elective like art or gym or theater, they don't have provincial exams. So you need to take a certain amount of those to get into university. And so this comparative civilizations course was taught by one of my favorite teachers, and it counted as a provincially examinable course, but it didn't actually have a provincial exam. It was kind of a trick one. So I took it because I needed to get my minimum to get into university, and the final project, which I guess counted as a provincial exam essentially, was a 30-minute presentation in front of the class where you took some sort of facet of civilization that has existed, throughout different cultures, throughout different societies, and compared how it affected those, societies or cultures, and throughout different periods of time, and through video, and through written, and through an actual oral presentation in front of the class. And so I, of course, did my presentation on wrestling because what else would I do it on? And which I'm sure that's going to be a common trend of people who appear on this show talking about going to school and doing projects on wrestling. I'm pretty sure I already heard someone talking about that. But um, and so yeah, I had become acquainted with Rick Patterson, who played the character Leatherface in Japan, and he wrestles a lot in Korea. He wrestled in Mexico. He wrestled in North America, obviously. Um, and on all those old IWA Japan deathmatch tapes. He's a Canadian guy. He's originally from Winnipeg, and he was living in Vancouver at the time. And I had become acquainted with him because he was working local indies, and I got him to autograph a piece of merchandise that I had bought online. And he asked me where I got it, and I told him and how much I'd paid for it. And he said, "Oh, if you ever want any kind of merchandise from Japan, let me know. I'll pick stuff up for you." And so we just kind of became friends through that. He would pick up, some of the magazines for me. He got me a Mitsuharu Misawa T-shirt. He got me a Kazushi Sakuraba T-shirt that he picked up in Japan, which I still wear those to this day. The Misawa shirt's a little tight on me, but because Japanese shirts are not very big. But but yeah, so I interviewed him for this project because here's a guy who's wrestled all over the world and seen the differences between wrestling in Japan and Mexico and North America, and so it was a kind of combination of that plus showing, highlights from my at the time quite extensive collection of pro wrestling tapes, and sort of showing the differences between the crowds and what's the difference between a crowd in Mexico versus a crowd at an All Japan Woman show, in the 90s, which is made up predominantly of teenage schoolgirls who, these were their idols. These were their, like the pop stars, but they were the Japanese ladies wrestlers, right? Versus, going to a Mexican show where, someone, the amount of history behind a mask. I specifically remember what clip I used for both, actually. And it was the finish to the Atlantis Viano 3 Mask versus Mask match from the first CMLL pay-per-view back in March of 2000. And it's the finish where Viano taps out, and just the eruption of the people, and then immediately the amount of people who just start crying because they realize here's a guy who's wrestled under this mask for like 25 years, and this is his livelihood. It just doesn't really compare to anything else in the world, where like, lose a mask, whatever, like move on next week. Okay, now you're not wearing a mask, right? So, but just kind of to wrap things up, yeah, that was, that was one of the coolest things I got to do in high school. And I remember getting 109 out of 110, and she docked 1 mark for grammar on my essay, which to this day I thought, you probably could have given me the gimme on that, just given me a perfect mark. And I still got the highest mark in the class. But yeah, no, that was a fun project to do for sure, and it just helped that it's something I have always had a passion for, and a pretty deep understanding and knowledge of some of the history and culture behind it.
Yeah. Were you wrestling at that point? When did you start actually doing wrestling yourself?
I was wrestling at that point. I wasn't trained at that point. I started like most people do, just screwing around with your friends on a trampoline. Um, Kind of when I was like 11 or 12. And it's funny, the first kind of backyard fed I had was some friends from high school, and no one worked. Like it was truly bizarre. Like I think I was the only one who wanted to work. Everyone wanted to shoot. So it was like this weird shoot kind of on a trampoline thing, but people are trying to do pro spots. Like people are trying to power bomb other people, but people aren't going with it.
The
And
idea of
it's
people trying to
I
work shoot matches on a trampoline just sounds hilarious.
oh it was super dangerous. How no one got killed is beyond me. I distinctly remember someone getting drop kicked like square in the chest and flying off the trampoline and hitting a tree, and like that kind of stopped that day's card because. But yeah, it was brutal. I don't know what the hell we were thinking. It was all people who were wrestling fans too, but like no one wanted like it never dawned on people like we should be working and like trying to put together matches and storylines and stuff. It's really weird. But a few years later, kind of an offshoot of that, I took some of my other friends who hadn't been involved in that, and we actually started doing. I got them hooked on ECW and Japanese wrestling, which were like my things back when I was like 15. It was like, oh, I wrestling was so popular around there. That's like the boom of the Attitude Era, is me being 14, 15, going to high school, and like everyone's wearing Stone Cold Steve Austin t-shirts. But I was that cool guy who like I knew about ECW and I knew about Japanese wrestling, and like I remember playing the WCW video games for N64, like Revenge and World Tour, and like these people, some of my friends and schoolmates saying, "Oh, some of these moves that some of the kind of the goofy kind of characters in Revenge, like I can't remember some, the Executioner and AKI Man and Doctor Frank and um, Maya Inca Boy." Well, that was just Kenta Kobashi and Jumbo Tsuruta and Mitsuharu Misawa and Akira Taue, and so. But I knew that because I knew that what moves they did, and so when the Executioner did a suplex into a powerbomb, I knew that was an Orange Crush, and I tried to explain this to my schoolmates, like, "Oh, that's just Kenta Kobashi," and they just hassled me endlessly that I was such a nerd for this kind of stuff. They didn't see the same kind of interest in it that I did, but yeah, so I got my other kind of school mates into wrestling, and we started doing our own fed. It was like 4 or 5 of us, where we started just booking our own, still on a trampoline, doing our own matches. And I remember one year for my birthday, I think it was my 15th or 16th birthday, we rented out the local wrestling school's ring. That was the thing they offered, like, oh, have your birthday party, and you can come live out your fantasies of
Well,
being in a
that's
wrestling
insane.
ring.
That's
Huh?
insane. That I can
Yeah,
never
no, it's
imagine
cool.
that happening.
Well, oh, it was crazy because my friend got a concussion doing it
What?
too. Yeah, he took like I remember he took a clothesline and like took a snap bump off of it and just like smashed his head on the back of the mat and got a concussion like on my birthday party. And we like videotaped the whole thing and like watched it afterwards, and I don't have the videotape still, thank God, because I'm sure it's atrocious. But but yeah, so I got into that, and then it was shortly thereafter. It was so when that school project would have been 2011, 2012, sorry, 2001, 2002,
Yeah.
and it was that previous summer, the summer of 2001, that I first met Scott and Justin at a local indie show and started coming out to VCW shows, which were in Scott's backyard. And he lived about 45 minutes to an hour away from me, but I had to take the bus ticket to his house. So it probably took a good hour and a half to get there. And yeah, so the previous summer is when I had started getting into VCW, and we started wrestling really regularly from that point on.
Was that on a trampoline at that point at VCW?
Say that again?
Was that on a trampoline at that point in VCW?
Yeah, So VCW started on a trampoline in Scott's backyard with him and Justin and their schoolmates in the summer of 2000. And Scott's family rented a trampoline for the summers every year, which I'd never heard of before, and I've never heard of since anyone renting a trampoline. But they did that, and so they would have VCW shows from like June through September kind of thing while the weather was nice, because for the rest of the year it rains a lot here. Although we still had our share of shows in the rain, but so summer 2000 and summer 2001 were trampoline, and then after Scott's family returned the trampoline for after the summer of 2001 is when we first built a ring base, where Lenny D and Chris Mason lived, kind of in kind of a forest adjacent to their house, and that's where we started doing our ring base shows like weekly for what feels like forever. Like, it's funny at the time. I mean, it felt like we did those years lasted for years and years, but we only did ring base shows from like October 2001 till like August 2003. So not even 2 years were we on a ring base. I guess that's a fair amount of time, but like we probably ran like, I don't know, 50 or 60 shows in that period. Like, maybe not, that might be an exaggeration, but we ran a lot of shows in that time period. And it just feels like such a massive part of my life, even though it's only 2 years or whatever. So
Yeah, and then you moved to the ring and everything. Well, what point did you get trained then? Was that after you started doing ring shows?
yeah, so we decided it would be cool. The same place where I had rented the ring for my birthday party, we looked into renting the ring for like a monthly, basically the pay-per-views. So we were running VCW regularly, and we had some storylines, not a ton, but there were some matches that we'd build up over time and whatever. One thing I do distinctly remember being something we did for the entire run of VCW is we were very much inspired by All Japan Pro Wrestling, and how kind of their big top stars would only wrestle a couple times a year, maybe once or twice. And it certainly helps that their matches were so amazing, but one of the things that would stand out is that you could say, oh, yeah, like Mitsuharu Misawa versus Kenta Kobashi from January 20th, 1997, which is an amazing match. You should look it up if you haven't seen it. And that was, Misawa and Kobashi had 3 matches that year. They had the January match, they had a match in the Champion Carnival in March, and they had a match in October of that year. And I can, what are we, 18 years later now, and I can still just rattle that off to you, right? And it helps that the matches were amazing, but it also helps that those matches didn't have time. You didn't see it on TV every week, and so those matches were made special. And so that's something we distinctly went out of our way to do was, okay, Scott and I aren't going to wrestle every week. Justin and I aren't going to wrestle every week. Scott and Justin aren't going to wrestle every week. We might have 2 singles matches in a year, and then you can remember, hopefully they'll be good, certainly for what we were doing at the time, and they'll be more special and more memorable, if, that all kind of works out in that way. So, but yeah, so we decided to start running kind of our monthly pay-per-views, and we asked that local wrestling school if we could rent their ring out, once a month. And they came back to us with a ridiculous quote. I don't remember how much it was, but it was really expensive. They wanted $200 a week or something like that. And, we didn't have that kind of money. We were just kids in school. So we looked at, there was another local wrestling promotion, so we got in touch with them. They had a wrestling school, and they were kind of baffled, like, that's something you would want to do? Like, they had never heard of such a concept, and they didn't even really know what to charge us. And so we basically, I think Scott, because Scott is ever the negotiator, said something. Well, he kind of worked them down to how about $5 a week, or maybe it was $10 a week. But it was reasonable for 17 and 18-year-old kids to we could afford to pay $5 once a month or $10 once a month to have these shows in the pro ring. So we did that for a year, where we'd run our regular weekly shows on our base, and then once a month we'd have the big quote-unquote pay-per-view in the pro ring. And after about a year of that, the guy who rented the ring to us, he'd come and watch us, and he'd sort of saw, like, okay, there's like these kids, certainly love this, and they kind of have they know some things what they're doing. They're certainly sloppy and green, and they don't know kind of the nuances and the technical side of things as much as I, thought I might. But so then he inquired whether we wanted to train or not, and so yeah, after about a year of that, we decided, what the hell, let's do it. So Justin, Scott, and I all started training in the summer of 2003, and then Scott and I had our first pro match in the fall of 2003. So
Yeah, but you didn't carry on with the indie stuff. You just carried on with BCW. I guess it's probably just
yeah,
more
so
fun.
it comes down to more fun for sure. The, I look back in hindsight now, wondering what would have happened had I stuck with indies and tried to make a go of it. I might be in better shape, both physically, from a cosmetic standpoint, and from I wouldn't be so beat up because I wouldn't have done all those dumb things that I did on backyard shows for all those many years. But it was kind of a matter of the indie we were working for. We weren't wild about the people running it and the organization. And after working a couple months, they sort of said, "Well, we don't have a place for you. You're gonna have to work security and do ring crew." And it's not that we were opposed to paying dues, because believe me, I've set up my share of rings. You can attest to the fact that I've set up, uh, you know, rings for promotions that I have nothing to do, where I'm a guest, and I'm quite hands on in making sure that things are done well and in a timely manner.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It just kind of, we did it because we were having fun, and it was kind of the natural progression and extension of the fun we were having. Okay, like, this is the way we'll get better. This is the way that we can have, we can wrestle in a ring more regularly, and we can have fun, because this is something we love to do. It's never anything I ever thought I would be able to pursue as an occupation. I realized that very early on. But I never had the dreams of making it. Um, but yeah, we kind of, it's kind of crazy. They weren't, the people who were in charge didn't really care that, like, okay, we were still running our little VCW shows even though after we were trained. And like some of the local pro guys would appear on VCW shows just as, oh, this is fun. Like, sure, I get to have matches and whatever. And but after a while, it just kind of, that indie started to flounder and eventually went out of business, and we just kept on trudging along with VCW, and I don't know, it was more fun, and we got to kind of call the shots, and sure, we were big fish in a little pond, but I don't know, that was okay for us. None of us had any desire to really make it to the big time. So what point was there in being miserable on indies, where you don't get to dictate how long you wrestle or what style you wrestle, or any of that sort of stuff. So certainly not a traditional maybe approach to making it in the wrestling industry, but
I think that's
I
probably a
don't know if
common
any of
theme
us.
with this podcast. Pretty common theme. Just doing it because you like it and not really caring if you make it anywhere. I think it's an interesting one though. I was talking to people who've sort of gone on to do pro stuff and do fairly well at it, and just thinking about the other people in who used to backyard or whatever, who were really good but just never gave a lot of time to trying indie or pro stuff, and just thinking of, like, where would they be now if they'd gone pro. It's just an interesting one to think about.
Yeah, if I can be honest with myself, I don't think I would have seen or done half the things that I have done. I think, I think the part of the problem is the geography of us here. We're kind of out in an island as far as pro wrestling goes up here in the Northwest. There's really not much of a scene in Washington, because it's technically not legal to run shows there without a bunch of red tape you got to go through. Really, the only pro group that can run profitably in the state of Washington is the WWF, who coincidentally enough were there last night. but and actually they were up here in British Columbia on Friday night. But um, so yeah, and Oregon has some stuff, but it's it's few and far between, and there's not a ton going on. And there's a few promotions that run here, and they mainly run right around the Greater Vancouver area. But there's some work on Vancouver Island, and there's some work in the Okanagan, which is about 5-6 hours away from here. Um, but it's a lot of. It's funny. I referred to myself as a big fish in a small pond. A lot of the local indie wrestlers are big fish in a small pond. They really don't. It's a different pond. It's a bigger pond than my pond, but it's like in the grand scheme of things, no one really knows who they are. It's not like people clamor about like the scene in the Pacific Northwest. Like there's not tape traders out there who are raving about the goings on in the Pacific Northwest and how there's all this like unsung talent. There is some really good talent for sure here. There's some great wrestlers, and there's some really nice people that we're all personally acquainted with. But honestly, the best example of making it as a pro wrestler in the Pacific Northwest currently is Kyle O'Reilly, and he had to get the hell out of here to do it. He had to move to St. Louis and have a pretty good support system in order to make something of a career out of it. And props to him now because he's amazing. He's a great wrestler, and he's doing really well for himself. But it's not because he's from here. It's because he moved away from here.
Yeah, because he got out of there. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So yeah, no. So I don't think had I stuck on with the indie wrestling, I don't think maybe I may not even be doing this podcast right now because I probably wouldn't have met you. So and I never would have come to there would have been no impetus to come to England or to go to Backyard Fest or to do any of the things that I did that have kind of come to define my my tenure in this crazy world that we call backyard wrestling.
Yeah. Well, what would you say those? What are some of the sort of highlights, do you think, highlight matches? I mean, I've got, don't know what your thoughts on this are.
Matches or just...
I guess matches is a way to frame it. One of the things I did actually write some notes for this one because I thought I would probably just get lost and have, because that I have no kind of memory whatsoever.
Yeah.
So the first thing I wrote
is well documented.
Yeah, the first thing I wrote down was versus Tyrant, which is the Versus the World 4 main event, international main event. And what are your thoughts on that match with John?
That match?
Yeah.
That match, that's an interesting one. I remember, I don't know if disappointment is the right word, but...
I know there's a lot of pressure on both of you guys.
I think there was a lot of pressure, and I had really high standards for myself, and I wasn't in my top physical shape at the time either. I definitely, if you go back and watch that match, I've got quite the gut on me, more so than usual. And but I don't know why there was so much emotion wrapped up in that match for me. I just had really high expectations. I'd been in main events before, and I think I had a pretty good reputation as being, in our little circle as being someone who could be counted on to have good performances and was someone that people looked forward to watching. But I put a lot of pressure on myself, and so we had a good match. And there's still to this day people who will bring that match up to me. There's some people in Washington who were there who tell me that was one of the best matches they ever saw live. And I mean, we did some crazy shit. And
yeah.
He's lucky that he made it out, but that guy was made out of elastic. Yeah. He took some ridiculous bumps in his day. Yeah, it was good. Well, it wasn't a bad. I don't know if I'd even go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying that was the first time
what were you saying?
That was the first time any of us sort of came over there, and that was a really good show in general. And whether you want to say you want to pick apart the match or whatever, it's definitely like a memorable exclamation mark on the show itself, which was a really good show.
Yeah. Yeah. It Yeah, that's a tough one. It's it's not one that I necessarily look back as being one of my like top matches, but it certainly was good, and it had like some real memorable moments, and I think we had the people with us for the most part. I remember it being a pretty like good audience who were really hot for it, and certainly like I don't know if like other. I'm sure other people remember this. I will never forget this. I don't think I've ever been more emotional after a match than after that one. I'd been watching a lot of Jumbo Saruda at the time, and I wanted to finish with a really brutal back suplex, and and I told John this, and he said that sounded great. Where I was gonna, heave him up really quick and then drive him down really hard and fast. And John, being the lunatic that he is, decided it would be a good idea to look back and kind of go over like he was going to be backflipping to his feet. And so when I drove him down, I haven't watched it in years, but I seem to recall it being just maybe the grossest back suplex ever. Like,
Yeah.
ever, ever, ever.
Yeah, his head goes
and
off to one side. Yeah, it's pretty nasty.
and I didn't think he was dead, but I was like, oh, he's got to be hurt. And so I cover him, and like it's kind of like a 1, 2, 3. Oh my God, is John alive? Like the audience, not just me, but I distinctly remember pinning him and then kind of rolling off of him, and then I started crying uncontrollably. And I'm an emotional person. People are well aware of this. If you ever meet me, like me crying is not, unheard of. Certainly not the case. But but I could not stop crying. And I remember Kelly was the referee, and he comes up and he goes, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I'm fine, but you need to check on him to make sure he's alive." And even to the point, I'm taking off my gear. I'm changing into my clothes, and people are constantly coming up to like tell me how great of a match it was, and all that kind of thing. And I can't stop crying. And to this point, if you see a picture of John and I, there's a picture of us after that match, um, and he looks like he's just got his ass kicked. He looks just ragged and just exhausted in the face, and I just look bloated, and like that I look like I've been blubbering for 30 minutes. My face is all pink, and my eyes are all welled up, and it's because I had been. So it's an awful picture. It's a really bad picture of us, but I still have it on my computer somewhere, and you may have been the person. Either you or Farrell took it, probably. Um, so yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a match a match I'll never forget for sure.
Yeah. So in terms of matches that are more memorable for the reason that it was a good match. So best matches, you'd say. What stands out to you?
It's funny. I look back. It's the older matches that typically stand out to me. Um, but I feel like I'm so much better now than I was then. I think it's the matches then that we put a lot of effort and time and planning into, and really stood out from the matches that were just kind of your weekly, day to day, let's have a wrestle kind of matches, right?
Yeah.
And I think part of it was also the backdrop, the fact that we were doing it on these big, grandiose settings for us, like the big Super Show matches, really kind of stand out as being um, noteworthy. So, like for me, one of my favorite matches I've ever done was the Matt Shock match, which I go back to and watch to this day,
Oh,
and
Fest 8 is that?
um, which was Beckerfest one. Sorry, versus the World one, Beckerfest 8,
Yeah.
um, and it's just it was just fun and memorable, and I've had better matches for sure, but it just kind of it stands out, and it's very concise, and the spots are crazy, and
Yeah, you do like the Dan Spike, the runner off the top, do you? Or something? No, what is it? Is
it
that the
was a
match?
Dan Spike off the top rope to the floor through a table, and the table broke his fall. It didn't break my fall. I'll tell you that. So, um, yeah, you could probably like list all the memorable spot fests I've had in my life. There was probably a Dan Spike in each one.
Yeah.
Um, that was kind of by, I don't know, by design. Um, I've always been someone who's kind of prided himself on having a deep understanding of psychology and telling a story in a match, and through different methodology. Is that a word? Sure, it is.
Yeah.
Of doing so, whether it's your standard kind of body part work, that it's kind of the first kind of story people kind of learn how to tell, and then there was a period in time where I went through where I was really into being a good heel. I was all about heel face dynamic and being a good heel and not telling stories that way. And still to this day, if I meet someone and even though I've been a babyface for like 4 years now, um, if I meet someone new and I have to wrestle them, it's the easiest kind of fallback for me putting a match together is me being the heel, them being the babyface, and working a traditional, shine and heat and comeback and hope spots and near falls and your kind of traditional American style match. Um, that's the easiest thing for me to put together, and I can call a match like that in my sleep. So um, even if I'm not, necessarily being a quote unquote bad guy, when it comes to being a heel. So, but some of the more complex matches, Scott and I have done some matches where we play up a lot on our own personal history. We play up a lot on the psychology of moves and the putting over the fact that certain moves are more have a higher success rate, and recognizing that fact and finding new ways to get in and out of those moves, and just finding new nuance and that sort of thing. And yeah, so I kind of rambled there. I don't really have any good specific examples of matches that involved that sort of stuff. For
Okay.
the longest time, I would always say that my best match was me versus Justin. We had an I Quit match at Canada Day 2006. And I haven't watched it in years, so I don't know how well it holds up. But I just remember just the emotion, and we told a really good story. We had a storyline that progressed over the spring of 2006 where we had been tag partners who kind of broke off from one another, and matches were getting more and more violent and they weren't having conclusive finishes. We had a double count out, we did a double knockout, and finally we needed something to settle the score, and so we did an I Quit. And uh, and I loved that match, and I just thought we had so many just little clever kind of nuanced spots, and involving weapons in kind of unconventional manners, and but we did some really brutal things in that match. Like I friggin' double foot stomp Justin's face through an open chair.
Is that the one with the
uh,
dance spike off the Coke machine?
Dan spike off a Coke machine through two tables that exploded into a million pieces. That's like one of the loudest things I've ever heard going through those tables. I don't know how. It's just the way we hit them. Um, but yeah, so yeah, that match stands out to me as being kind of one of my good matches. But then I kind of think about it, and that match was almost 9 years ago, and I've grown so much as a wrestler, and just how I kind of come to understand things, that I feel like the matches I'm having now have to be better, but they're not necessarily as memorable, or there's not as much, they're not as impactful. Maybe I just feel when you're not as good and you have good matches, those good matches stand out. But when you're good and you just have good matches, not that I'm saying I just have good matches, but realistically, I just have good matches. Not necessarily great matches. I'm gonna come off as the biggest asshole. Jesus Christ! I
No,
can't believe I
I
just said
totally know
that.
what you mean. I totally know what you mean.
But like we've done this enough that we know how to not have bad matches. You're not necessarily going to have amazing matches every time out, but you know the things to do to not suck, right? So,
Yeah.
um, and the fact that I do that on a monthly basis now seems to me like, oh, these matches have to be better than the matches I was having back in the day, but they just don't mean as much, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
What about you and Ricky? That time where you was that the time where you just showed up and no one knew you were coming?
oh, in Rhode Island,
Yeah.
yeah, that was that. That's funny because I say to this day that's the biggest pop I've ever gotten in my life. Um, but and the match was good. Ricky and I wrestled. Ricky Crash or yeah, I guess he was just Ricky Crash at the time. Um, it's funny. You just say Ricky, everyone knows who he is. You know, like
Yeah.
even people you never met him. I don't think. Have you?
No, no, I have so many like mutual friends with him, but I've never met him.
No, right? So like even people who have never met the guy, you just say Ricky, and everyone knows who he is, right? So. Um, Uh, but I guess it's the same way people still say call me Makabe, and everyone knows who you're talking about, right? So
Yeah.
even with the latest insurgence in New Japan's popularity, people don't mistake me for Togi Makabe. But that is where the name came from. However, for those who are not aware, I can tell that story later if you want. But
I was going to ask it, but we kind of skipped it, I guess.
sure, yeah, we can
Yeah,
get back to that.
yeah,
It's a
sure.
fun story, sort of. But yeah, so I wrestled Ricky, and yeah, but that was um, VCW guys were going to BYE. It was BYE 5. And, they were insisting on me coming with, but I was unemployed at the time and really couldn't afford to go. And so I wasn't going. And I was pretty heartbroken over the fact that I wasn't going. And then, um, so let's say the show was Saturday, Sunday. I woke up Thursday morning and I'd had a dream that I was there. And I messaged Drew Cordero about it, and he said, "Man, if you could come, that would be friggin' amazing." He said, "Ricky is talking about coming, and it'd be great if we had like a surprise. It'd be a main event. Ricky won't be a surprise. He's gonna come, and everyone's gonna know he's gonna be there, but we'll keep you as a surprise." And so I looked into the price of flights, and we had been normally paying about $500 a flight at that point. This is like 10 years ago. Um, and because it was such short notice, the flight was $900, and I really couldn't afford it, but I did have the money technically, and so I booked the flight Thursday morning, and I think I flew out Friday morning, and I got there Friday night, and they hid me from everyone who was there, except for a select few people. Because there was a few surprises on that show. I was a surprise, Steve Shilson was a surprise, and Chris Maverick was a surprise, and all three of us were hidden from everyone except for the people who they were wrestling. They were both wrestling Justin. So Justin knew I was there. Ricky knew I was there. A few of the Rhode Island guys knew I was there. But like I know, like we stayed with Jimmy Starbucks. So like Starbucks knew I was there, and Drew knew I was there. But like Big Al didn't know I was there. And if you go back and watch that video when I come out, the look on Al's face when I come out is just like the funniest thing ever. He's like so incredibly surprised and stoked that that I was there. So I say to this day that is definitely a great memory, and it's probably the best pop I ever got. But and the match was good, and it featured a dance spike onto I think we did a pallet bridge between two chairs. I also did a senton to the floor where he moved out of the way, and that was maybe the worst idea I've ever had in my life.
Yeah, why would you
That
do that?
was it was so painful. There was big thick padding on the floor, and I just figured, oh, that'll be fine. And yeah, no, that was an awful idea. Um, yeah,
Yeah. I want to talk a bit about you guys coming over here, though. First time was
I was hoping you were gonna get there.
yeah, yeah. So Heatfest 2008 was the first time.
2008 and then 2009. Yeah, we went to both of those.
Yeah.
Um,
Was that sort of a long time your thing that you've been thinking about coming across, or it's from because the Heatfests have been sort of the big show in the UK for a few years. I think the first one was like '04, and it just got bigger and bigger each year. Actually, '07 wasn't that good.
yeah, I want to say like '06 and '07. Was '07 the year that had 4 days?
No, '06 had 4 days, uh,
Okay.
and '07 only had 2 days, and not much media ever got out of it for some reason. But yeah, '06
Was
was like a big
'07
one.
the year? Was that the year that John wrestled Aussie Mayhem
Yeah, I think it was.
in '07?
Yeah, that was like one of the matches I remember actually, because it's one of the only matches that actually have like a
That
video
was one
made
of
of
the
it.
matches that got out. And did Billy wrestle Rave
Yeah,
Christian? Yeah, I remember that match being pretty good too. But um, yeah, okay, so '06. Yeah, that was. I feel like we were in more contact then, and certainly leading up to you guys coming here in the spring of '07. Um, and I was definitely starting to follow the UK scene more and more. I feel like I was kind of the bridge between VCW and the UK.
Yeah, I think you and I
I could
both
be
the collaborative.
I could be yeah, the two of us. I feel like we're kind of the the bringers of our people to one another's
Yeah,
uh, scenes.
yeah,
But because you were definitely always championing our stuff to the UK scene, and I probably didn't do as good of a job championing the UK stuff to the people over here. But I watched it and I started to really get into NAW around that time and kind of the style of those videos that you were making. I distinctly remember when you came over the first time. We were sitting at Applebee's, which doesn't even exist anymore here, and on the one of your guys' last nights here, saying how much I wanted you to make a match by match NIW or NAW style music video for versus the World, which you ended up doing for day one,
yeah.
and you ended up using March of the Fire Ants for Me versus John, which is a killer song. Um, but I distinctly remember like suggesting it at the table, and you kind of rolling your eyes and started to make like almost a list of demands, like, yeah, okay, I'll do it, but I'm gonna need this, and like you wanted to do it, but you're like, oh, it's a lot of work, and why are you putting me on the spot? Um,
So
but
this is a great example of how you have an amazing memory and I don't, because I remember it was you that asked me to make the NAW style video, but I would never have been able to tell you it was at Applebee's or what my like I had made demands or anything.
what your reaction was?
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, no, that's a distinct memory for me. So yeah, no, but you ended up doing it, and it was a great video, and thank you for doing it. I should go back and watch it actually. Um, but so um,
Yeah. So you guys
but yeah,
you were
so
sort of following the scene a little bit.
yeah, I had started following the scene more, and talking to some of the guys there, and you guys had come here the previous year, and it just seemed logical. And well, you came again the next year, by yourself to
Yeah.
versus the World Five, and yeah, it was just basically I remember you and I hanging out like a lot that trip, because it was just you by yourself, so it was so much easier than corralling multiple people. I feel like I've always said that, like, yeah, people who would come for the big shows, you'd have a great time because you're a part of this big scene. But if you ever really want to come and see what Vancouver is really all about and what we're really all about, coming to a show by yourself, which a few select people have done, like yourself and Josh, Dangerous Dave came by for a weekend by himself, and Rigger came for a weekend by himself, and those you really get the one-on-one experience and the real royal treatment. But
Yeah.
that's besides the point. So yeah, it just seemed logical that of course we wanted to come over and be a part of your guys' big shows because you had come over and been a part of our big show, and there was people that we had never met who we wanted to wrestle, and vice versa. And so yeah, we came over for Heatfest in '08, and it was Justin and Scott and I, and then Starbucks and Lee Andrews, right?
Yeah.
That first year. It's an
Yes.
interesting group of foreigners for sure, um, but Starbucks had come to Versus the World the previous year and had that really awesome match with Steve Farrell,
Oh
which
yeah.
totally delivered. That's exactly what we wanted it to be, and it was like perfect for its spot on the card. And those guys just killed it. And so I think Starbucks had gotten a taste of it and liked you guys a lot and got along with you guys, and so he wanted to come. And Lee Andrews had previously come. I think him and Ashley Dunn had become quite chummy.
Yeah.
And so yeah, no, both Heat Fests were amazing. I probably have more positive memories of the first one because I didn't get massively hurt at it. But um,
Yeah. On that
yeah,
first.
that's where we finally got to have our match, Alex, after all
Yeah.
those years,
That's right.
which
That's cool.
I think it was good. Yeah, I was happy with it. I
Yeah, I
think
was.
I remember one of the distinct like memories I have of it is when we're putting it together. I think there was like a football match going on, and we didn't take part in it because we were putting our match together instead, and and trying to like a lot of the people there, people knew the name that's kind of thing. Like you know the name, and part of it was like a byproduct of the quality of the media. Is like you sort of knew what the guy wore, but you didn't really know what his face looked like because the quality of the music videos wasn't that great.
Yeah.
I heard, I think GBH and Luke were talking about that, but it's true, and and so I think like people, oh yeah, Daniel Makabe, that's a name I know, and like I might have seen something here and there, but I kind of like took it as a way to, well, um, this is my first introduction to this group of people who don't really know me for the most part, except for those who have come over and have seen me or have wrestled me. Um, but I wanted to have a good match with you, and I wanted to do my best for you because I felt like I kind of owed you that. I mean, you can experience. You can share your experiences with the putting together of that match, but I feel like maybe owing it to you is a bad choice of words. But I wanted us to have a good match after all the build up of being friends for a few years and talking so much. Um, but I definitely wanted to get over as well. And so the few things I remember is I remember planning a spot where I was going to throw some, pretty European uppercut centric, which I was at the time. I was I still am, I guess. And you specifically saying like nobody throws European uppercuts here like you do. Like throw them like you do, and they'll get over. And I remember that spot getting over really well. I remember wanting to do the moonsault, the spaceman quebrada, because I like people my size typically don't do that spot, and so that got over really well. Um, the the two kind of big things though was the callback spot to you and Luke the
Yeah, down the
previous
hill.
year at Britfest,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that
It
was
was
Britfest
Britfest '07, right?
2007, yeah.
Yeah, where you guys did the DVD down the hill. And so I loved that spot, and I thought, well, that'll be great, and it'll be a callback that people will appreciate. And Luke wasn't there, and I
For
would meet
reasons,
him,
yeah.
the next for reasons, but I would meet him the next year. And Luke was someone I wanted to meet too,
Yeah.
and so it was like a little bit of a. I don't think he was technically allowed to be there, so it
Yeah,
was kind
yeah.
of
That's
it was
part of the
almost kind
reasons.
of us thumbing our nose at authority, like this guy's not allowed to be here, but he's here in spirit.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
definitely. That's definitely my tribute to Luke, so.
and so we did that, which got over really well. And then earlier that year, when you came to VCW, you wrestled Kyle Lenny D, which you're one of the few people who can say that you've done that because most people can't. and um, and you gave him the Pyramid Driver. And it was just brutal, 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 and like it was just I
Well,
remember just losing my mind.
the reason for that
Pardon?
was because we planned.
Oh, he goes heavy, so I'm assuming it
Well,
was
well,
that. But
um, earlier in that show, there was like some multi-man match involving Amp, and he'd
yep,
done like a pyramid driver. Amp had done a pyramid driver earlier in the show, and we'd already decided that was going to be the finish. And I sort of looked at
yep,
Kyle and was like, "Oh, should we change the finish?" And he was like, "No, no, just do it onto my head, and it'll be that'll be fine."
yeah. So you gave him it was a brutal looking pyramid driver, and it was definitely more brutal than the one that Amp did earlier in the show.
Yeah.
But so fast forward a couple months, and the finish to our match is going to be the pyramid driver, and not to be outdone, I said, "Well, give me one worse than the one you gave to Kyle," and I don't know if that was the best idea in hindsight, although I didn't get hurt from it. But that thing looked just vicious,
Do you know that
and
that's in the Botchamania?
I was about to bring up the fact that we got into Botchamania, Alex.
uh,
I love that we got into Botchamania with that. That's just the funniest thing. Like on an obviously backyard show too, you know?
yeah, yeah. I think I don't know. I think it was like I don't know some guy, some UKBYW guy who sort of I didn't really know had sent it into to Matthew, the guy who does Botchamania, because
Yep.
I remember sending like a message to Matthew, like I don't know why, just like that wasn't a botch, that was intentional. Why was that in the video? And him just being like, yeah, well, someone sent it to me. He sends me stuff all the time. I wanted to use one of his clips just to shut him up, and so I used it. I was like, okay.
Well, it looked brutal too, so
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
That's fine. But yeah, it was that was pretty cool. It was years later too. It was like 3 or 4 years later that the thing ended up in the Botchamania, right?
Yeah.
Maybe longer, 4 or 5 years. Like I mean, it was a few years ago now, but it was, more years had passed than have since. So, um, but yeah, so I was happy with my first foray into the UK scene. The following day, I wrestled Ashley Dunn,
Yeah.
and
He was just coming off like
that
a
much
shoulder injury, I think, with me, in
he was
fact.
coming off that really brutal shoulder like dislocation or separation. I can't remember,
Oh,
but
it's a collarbone,
it was
maybe.
like collarbone. Yeah, I think his collarbone like popped out. I just remember. We definitely worked around that and kind of based some of the psychology on it. And we had a pretty good match. It wasn't amazing, but it was good. And I think it was the main event of day two. Um, and then the last day was me and Justin versus Farrell and Dan.
Yeah.
And that match was good. It wasn't amazing. It had some good spots, but I think we were all pretty tired. It was the third day, and I don't know if our styles necessarily clicked as well as we'd hoped. I think Dan was also pretty inexperienced at that point, and he was pretty young at that point. So he's gotten loads better since,
Yeah.
and has since stopped wrestling altogether. But yeah, so I mean that match, I loved the finish to that match, which
Yeah.
was Farrell having me in the figure four, and Justin kind of lining him up to give him the big boot to break it up, and Farrell, kind of lying flat as Justin came flying in, and Justin hit me with the big boot, which I have taken more than my share of the 15%, as it's referred to now in certain scenes where in Young Bucks matches, 15% of the time they inadvertently hit one another. That's kind of the joke. That they're constantly, like they're super kicking each other or, like bumping into each other just to set up their various spots. And I've been on my share of Justin Chu sad kicks as a part of the 15%, more times than most, if not anyone else, actually. So, and that was a good one. So, but yeah, no, Heatfest was a lot of fun, and every time I came over to the UK was good fun, except for that time that I fractured my vertebrae.
Yeah, yeah, that wasn't so much fun. Yeah, that was uh, yeah, it was weird because that happened in '09, and we spent a lot of time, in waiting around in the hospital and all that kind of stuff. And like the following year, like the exact same thing happened with Steve, like getting a concussion. And I was like, okay, these summer interfeds, you know, it's just deja vu all over again. Just my friends getting hurt. It's not good. And then
Yeah.
they just stopped happening anyway. So yeah,
It's funny because oh 09, I think I may have had better matches in '09. I really like the three-way I had with GBH and Dave,
yeah.
which he totally just scoffed over in his podcast. I got really upset about that. I was like, it was a good match. Like, why aren't you talking about it? Um, it was a fun match.
No,
But
that was a
and
super
then
fun
my
match.
match, the second day was Scott and I versus Ozzy and Taylor, which I loved that match. I think that match is great. Um, and and then the third day was the big VCW BBWF showdown,
Yeah.
which we planned so many spots in that match, and we got to do like none of them because I got hurt just before he made the hot tag after we got heat on him. And from that point on, it was just going to be a demolition derby. I think we had 6 tables that I think I spent most of the money on them, if I recall. And they
Yeah, I
weren't
remember we
cheap.
had quite an ordeal. Like we had quite an ordeal getting them. I remember that much.
Yeah, for sure. But we got those tables, and I spent a bunch of money on them, and and Ozzy and Bob ended up using a bunch of them, but that's fine. That's cool. Um, but yeah, so we had planned just this amazing match, and I remember being in the hospital with you and Scott and Siege. I don't remember if
Yeah,
Justin
Siege
was
was
there or
there.
not. And lying in a bed in emergency, waiting for someone to come see me, and Scott and I going spot for spot, telling you guys what the rest of the match was going to be, and you and Siege just sitting there like dumbfounded, like one that we could remember it, and two that it was like these guys are lunatics that they were going to do all of this stuff. Um,
The spot
but
that I
yeah,
remember
we had
most
some
distinctly
crazy
from
shit.
that, the spot I remember most distinctly from that was going to happen was it was going to be like a table on the outside, and Justin would be like on the other side of the table, and you and I can't remember which way around it was, but you and Scott would like double gorilla press John to the outside into like a 3D through the table or something like that.
That I was gonna bring up that exact spot. It was gonna be Scott and Justin doing the gorilla press and me doing the cutter. But
Right.
yeah, that spot was wild. John would probably get really hurt on it, so it's probably for the best that he didn't do it. But yeah, no, that spot was crazy, and we need to bring that back. All right, I'm gonna keep that one in the old memory bank for
3-2-1
for.
battle next month. Here we go.
What's funny is as of this show airing, probably a couple weeks after, we are doing a street fight. We're not sure what to call it yet. We want to call it No Dicks Barred because that's what street fights in I Sucks Dicks were called. But we feel that will confuse the fine people in Seattle. So, but we are looking at doing a street fight and doing a gimmick match in for their big shows coming up in April, which originally enough is titled Battle Mania. So we will be a part of that, and we will be breaking some things for sure, but hopefully not anyone's vertebrae, nor will there be any 3Ds from inside the ring to outside the ring. But
Uh,
but other than that, it's funny because that happened, and obviously it sucked and it hurt, but we just kept on going, and I kind of can chalk that up to poor diagnosis by uh, the people in Aylesbury who didn't bother giving me an X-ray. Um, but I didn't even know my vertebrae was fractured until I got back here to Canada. Um, there was like a day or two, where I was kind of, not really all that well for wear, and one of those days was kind of a travel day back up to um, Hazel Grove. But I think after that, one day I woke up and people were just kind of like lounging around. It was like, all right, well, I'm ready to go. Let's get into the city. Let's see things. Let's do things. It's like, set me loose. I got to go record shopping. Time is money. So,
yeah.
and you guys are like, all right, if that's what you want to do. So, and we proceeded to walk all over the damn place. We went to York on that trip. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I went to
Um,
York.
we went
Did it,
to.
no,
Did we go to Liverpool? No, we went to Blackpool.
oh, yeah.
We we went to Liverpool the first year, but the second year we went to Blackpool. So yeah, we went to Blackpool, we went to York.
Oh, shit. Yeah,
Chester was
I was just trying to
Chester was the
remember,
previous.
like, going to York, and what I remember distinctly from that was going to the York dungeon, and there's, like,
Yes, yes.
a part where you're, like, in a courtroom, and, they pick on someone from the audience, and they picked on you. I remember that.
They did pick on me, and now I kind of brought it upon myself because when he was kind of setting up the preamble, and I'd been to one of those. I'd been to the London dungeon before when I was young, when I was like 16, and so I knew that sort of thing happened. So when he was kind of setting up the preamble and he's looking down at all of us, I was making eye contact with him, and I was like almost kind of inviting him to pick on me because we were looking at each other right in the eye, and I was like, okay, here it comes. I don't know why, because I'm not really. I'm outgoing, but I'm not super outgoing, and I'm not like I'm funny, but I'm not like one of those like naturally kind of funny to everybody, kind of in public, haha, real comedian types.
Yeah.
One of those outgoing kind of assholes, and so I don't know why I was inviting this upon myself, but for some reason I did, and so, but yeah, we did go to York, and we went to Blackpool, and we had a really nice time. And all the while, I was just surviving on paracetamol and my desire to have a good vacation. And it wasn't until I got back to Canada that I started to get numbness in my legs, and at which point I sort of went, I probably need to go see a doctor. And that's when I found that I had fractured my vertebrae. So, um, and I didn't end up. I had one match the next month, which is crazy to me that I even had a match the next month. But then I didn't wrestle again for almost a year.
But you eventually, because I was going to say that's one injury that sort of put you out for a while, but then you did come back to it. I remember you had like a string of concussions or something like that at one point as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've had my share of concussions, more than I really care to have, for sure. There was a period where I was starting to get pretty bad dizzy spells in 2006 after a concussion I had suffered in the spring of '06. And so I basically took the summer off until I, wasn't having them. But I was just lying down, looking up in my bed. I was, the room was spinning, like, more frequently than I would have cared for it to. And I eventually did come back. Um, I mean, we don't really need to make things super morbid here, but realistically, I've wrestled longer than I should have, considering the amount of concussions that I've had. I don't feel any real effects from it currently. Uh, it's not, I don't get headaches, or I still have a really good memory, as you can attest
Yeah.
to. Uh, but uh,
Is it
it's
in your
probably
mind
not
to
something I.
stop, or because I remember you saying before, like I can remember probably a couple of occasions where you told me, "Oh, this is my last year," or I think that was like the impetus of us having the match at Heatfest. Actually, I remember you saying, I remember specifically where it was. We were outside that fucking Russian Circles gig that I couldn't get into because I had stupid ID, and you were saying, "Oh, I'm probably gonna stop next year." So after I've wrestled a few people I want to wrestle, I want to wrestle you, blah blah blah. Then I'll stop.
Yeah,
And that's like '08.
it's you can attest to this, that what we do is, it's really, I mean, I was going to say it's not quite like anything else, but I think anyone who's passionate about anything probably feels that same way, that what they do is not quite like anybody else's passion or their pastime. I Every time that I attempt to walk away, or maybe cut down on the amount of times I do it, or the frequency, or it's just, it's something that is forever inside me, and it's something I just have a knack for and a love for. And even, like, I have a match coming up next week, and I've known about this match for about a month, and I haven't sat down to actually plan out the match with the person involved, although we are having a discussion this week, at some point. But I constantly have ideas rolling through my head, and sometimes I get them from watching wrestling, and sometimes I get them just sitting, on the bus listening to my iPod or whatever, and like things will just come to me, and that's, that I'd like to do that. And I don't feel there's any replacement for physically being the person to actually execute your own ideas. If that's something you've come to get used to, sure, it can be fun to be a booker, and it can be fun to help put together other people's matches, and I'm perfectly capable at doing those things. I've done that a lot in my with my peers. Anyone who's ever wanted help, I've been very open to doing that. Um, but there's no substitution for doing it yourself if that's what you've come to get used to. And so I know one day I have to quit. I don't know when that day is. I keep telling myself. I basically stopped saying it out loud, because I said it out loud too many times to people, and then now people are calling me on it. Like, oh, weren't you going to quit a few years ago? And I'm like, okay, yeah, I was. You got me.
Oh,
But
sorry.
um, no, it's not just you. Like, people, like even people in my band, when I say, "Oh, you got to come watch me wrestle," I'm like, "Yeah, didn't you have your last match?" Doing air quotations. Didn't you have your last match like a year or two ago? And I was like, "Yeah, maybe." Ignore the fact that I said that. Um, the other real distinct one I remember is going to, quote unquote, Backyard Fest 11 in Chicago, and saying, "This is the last time I'm ever going to travel for wrestling," and like saying that out loud at the conclusion of that event, which of course I went back on, because I ended up going to NYE in 2013 and 2014. Um, I think in hindsight, I may have said that because I hated that show so much. No offense to the guys, the people who put us up and the people who put that show together. They're really nice guys. I like them personally, but it was not a well executed show, and it had no right being called Backyard Fest, and it just really left a sour taste in my mouth when it came to traveling for wrestling, and I had no desire to do it, and so I made it very clear that I wasn't going to do it anymore, and then of course I went back on my word. So my apologies for that. But I mean, what good is a wrestling retirement if you don't go back on it? That's kind of
That's kind of the
that's a
point,
very
right?
common theme. No one ever stays properly retired. The only person who did is Jack Briscoe, who one day walked away and said, "I'm not going to do this anymore," and he never did. So. But everyone, even like Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair, who are broken down and way past their primes, they're still kind of doing it. they're not they're not doing it well, but they're still kind of doing it. Um, so yes, I'm a hypocrite, but so is everyone.
I wasn't
So
I wasn't calling you out on being a hypocrite. but
no, I understand that.
but yeah, I don't. I think, like you said, everyone. There's no such thing as retirement, especially in backyard wrestling. Everyone goes back on it, and it's just
I
you
mean,
just stop when you have to stop, pretty much.
you have to stop at some point, and eventually it kind of feels like, oh god, aren't we getting a little old for this, right? I mean, thankfully, my current main outlet. I'm probably right around the median age, so the fact that there's people who are still older than me and still get a kick out of it, and I don't have to feel so silly. It also helps that we're wrestling in front of decent sized crowds. 3-2-1 Battle are running, pretty regularly in front of 150, 200 bodies, who are very receptive and very nice, and there's some very attractive people in the audience as well. It's
But how does that
not that
compare to the? How's
I'm
that
not throwing anything out there.
Okay, okay. How does that compare to the Mexican restaurant that you recently wrestled in, though?
Not as plentiful, not as receptive, and not as attractive.
But
Uh,
so, like, moving into the future, though, because just like you said, you said it before that this would be my last match or last time I travel for wrestling. I've heard it said a few times that this will be the last VCW versus the World or big super show for VCW or Ice Sticks or what have you, and there's at least one more. I hope, otherwise I've wasted some money on a plane ticket. Not that it would be a wasted trip, but yeah. Do you think this will be the last one?
I am confident in saying that this will absolutely be the last one because I don't think any allow Scott to convince us to do another one after this. Uh, it's sometimes it's a bit of a law of diminishing returns, but there's been some anomalies in there. Like, when we started up I Suck Sticks, we thought we were more popular than ever, and there was a real clamoring for people who wanted to come to our shows. And then we ran the 2 Dream Slam shows, and hardly anyone came. It was just a couple dudes from Australia. And those shows were fun, but they were hardly super shows, quote unquote. It kind of felt like, well, I guess, that era is over. People don't, people are growing up. They have wives and houses and babies and jobs and cars and, responsibilities. And they can't afford to travel halfway around the world to fake fight with some friends in front of their other friends. But then we went and had, the first I Suck Sticks Big Dick Wrestling Universe, and that show went incredibly well. So it was sort of okay, there is still some gas in the tank. And then the next year we ran the second Big Dick Wrestling Universe, and the turnout wasn't as good, and the shows I don't feel were as good. The venue wasn't great, the heat wasn't great, the layout of the venue wasn't great. There were still some very good matches on those shows, but I just feel like it was kind of a lacking show, and it was sort of, oh well, maybe maybe we should have stopped when things were at our kind of our peak, but never one to follow that. we did one this past year, and it was a lot of fun again. It was a really good crowd of people, and just like the people who came in for the show had a good time, and the show was good. I'd say it was better than the previous year for sure. Maybe not the year before, but it was still a good show, and has kind of got our spirits up that okay, we have these good shows still left in us, but we are getting older, and certain we don't have the same kind of interest level from our guys, let alone I don't know if we should expect to have the same kind of interest level from the people such as yourself who are traveling from all around the world to join us for this, because really what do we have if we don't have you guys? But I feel like we've got one more good show left in us. People saw that show and saw that it was a fun time, it was a good crowd, a receptive crowd. Those who came had a good time, and the wrestling was good, and we can still do this. And so I don't want to overstay our welcome. That's like a big fear of mine. But I know part of the lure is that technically this would be the 10th versus the world if all the shows we'd had were labeled Visa versus the world. And so what better way to go out than with number 10? And so yeah, Visa versus the world 10. It's coming up this coming summer/fall Labor Day weekend in Vancouver, British Columbia, and it's going to be a great time. And I can safely say it is the last time that we will have a show of this nature. We'll probably keep on wrestling, as long as we have an outlet down in Seattle, or if anyone around here provides one. But as far as what you've come to know as a VCW Super Show, this will be the last one. I'm confident in saying that, and hopefully it's one of the best ones.
Well, I have it documented right here on MP3 podcast format, so we can always play it back to you when VCW vs. the World 11 happens in Chicago next year. So.
Touche.
Okay, on that note, we have run to 90 minutes, which I feel is like the limit for listenability of a podcast. So, I think that's, unless there's anything else you want to hit.
Not necessarily. We missed the story of the name, but people basically know it. It's Togi Makabe in New Japan, formerly Shinya Makabe. It's kind of a homage to him. I hope to one day meet him and confuse him when I try to explain to him how I took his name.
Nice. Okay, cool. So yeah, this is a fun one. We meant to do this when I was originally doing this one of them like 4 years ago or something. So I'm glad that we got to do it.
I'm really glad we got to do it. I've been listening back to them, and I feel like I like the sound of my own voice, so I'm quite happy to listen back to this one as well. And it's just nice to talk to you as well, because we don't do that as much as we possibly could. But now that I sort of have this Skype thing figured out, sort of, this is something we could do more regularly.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Okay, cool. So that'll do it for this episode. Thanks very much. The end. Cool.